Mary Rowlandson was born in England in 1638. She sailed with her parents John and Joan White to Salem, Massachusetts in 1639. At 18, she married Joseph Rowlandson, a Puritan minister, in 1656. They had 4 children, but one died as an infant at age 3. They lived in Salem, Massachusetts. Mary's father was one of the founders of the town of Lancaster in Massachusetts Bay Colony. Her father was at his death wealthier than any of his neighbors in Lancaster. Here is a map of Salem, Massachusetts, which was, by the way, one of the most significant seaports in early America. Near the end of what was later called King Philip's War, on February 10, 1675, Nipmuc and Narragansett Indians attacked Lancaster. Their town was targeted as an attack zone due to their isolated location far from the nearest town, and because of the rising prominence of Reverend Joseph Rowlandson. Joseph was on his way to Boston to raise troops to protect Lancaster at the time. He was not there when the attack occurred. Mary and her children were among those captured. Her youngest daughter was wounded and eventually died in captivity. Here is a quote from Mary's narrative. Some in her home were fighting for their lives, others wallowing in their blood, the house on fire over our heads, and the bloody heathen ready to knock us on the head if we stirred out. Now might we hear mothers and children crying out for themselves and one another, Lord, what shall we do? At first, Mary was mistreated by the Indians, but later she became accustomed to their way of life. She adapted by using her skills, like sewing and knitting, by making clothes and selling them to members of the tribe. At one point, she even made a shirt for King Philip's son, at which point he paid her. She then offered her payment to her master. He refused and told her to keep the money. Mary was a Puritan, and so believed that the Indian attack hadn't just happened. God had determined it. They considered themselves as part of the new Israel, and their mission was to model a true Christian life. They believed that the Puritans were the chosen people of God. But the Indian attack had been God's punishment for the Puritans' failure to uphold their covenant with God. A quote from Mary Rowlandson. The first week of my being among them, I hardly ate anything. The second week, I found my stomach grow very faint, for want of something, and yet it was very hard to get down their filthy trash. But the third week, though I could think of how formerly my stomach would turn against this or that, and I could starve and die before I could eat such things, yet they were sweet and savory to my taste. For 11 weeks and 5 days, Mary and her children were forced to accompany the Indians through the wilderness to avoid colonial militia. They traveled about 150 miles. Shown here is a map of their travels, starting with Lancaster, traveling through Princeton, Rutland, Oakham, Dana, Northfield, Vernon, Hinsdale, Chesterfield, then traveled the same route back. A ransom was requested for Mary of 20 pounds 3 months into her capture. She was exchanged at Redemption Rock in Princeton, Massachusetts on May 2, 1676. Her 2 surviving children were released soon after. In 1678, Joseph Rowlandson preached a sermon about his wife's captivity, titled, A Sermon of the Possibility of God's Forsaking a People That Have Been Near and Dear to Him. 3 days later, he suddenly died. Mary wrote a book to recall the horrid details of her capture. The book was called The Sovereignty and Goodness of God. It was later renamed into several different titles. The book reached bestseller status and is now known as a literary classic. In her book, she also conveyed an understanding and sympathy for her captors. She noted that they had suffered and had to face tough decisions. She showed the Indians as instruments of God, sent to be a scourge to the whole land.